I want to make sure that we talk about your relationship with poetry and specifically how poetry has been a language that has helped you. I don't know. I want you to say, but like access the goddess, connect to the goddess, be a mouthpiece for her. How I don't even know how you would describe that, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because when I was growing up, to me, poetry was sacred. Like it just
mm,
was. And I wasn't really aware of the goddess. My sense of spirituality, I mentioned that my dad was into world religions and there were thousands and thousands of books, but none about the divine feminine. But to me, I think the muse was the goddess. Like the
mm,
muse and poetic inspiration was my channel to the divine feminine, partly because my mother was a poet and she was also a witch, even though she didn't know it yet. So the way she taught me about poetry and the way she initiated me into poetry was a very goddessy kind of an experience for me. It was really a way that I connected with her spiritually was through our shared passion for poetry. So it really felt as if poetry was a spiritual path in itself. And I thought it was, like so many poets nowadays do, they feel that poetry is sort of spiritual and that's it. They don't need, art is spiritual. So many people, I think, feel that nowadays. And it wasn't until I then discovered, I think there was a point where I suddenly began to realize after I became aware of the goddess when I moved to California and I began to be aware of witchcraft and goddess things, and I had that experience I told you about with Kuan Yin.
mhm.
Around that point, I began to realize that the muse was a goddess and the muse really was a goddess. Like that I had been into the muse of poetic inspiration all along, but actually that was the goddess all along.
Mhm.
And then I had this incredible experience of going to the Midwest and becoming like part of a Earth spirituality group and having to write poetry for the seasons and Wiccan poetry. And that's when I began to put two and two together. And I was like, I am a religious poet. I'm a religious poet of the goddess. So that was a huge revelation for me. I had never thought of myself as a particular kind of poet. But since then, it's just gotten stronger and stronger. And so, like, my first book, published in 1997, was my first book of poetry called Eve, was all about goddesses, and it was organized into 9 sections. Each one was dedicated to a different goddess. And I found that all my poems I'd written so far like fit into those goddess categories.
Mm.
And then I did my book Spells was very spiritual, very goddessy. And then the Poetry Witch Little Book of Spells, which is like pocket rituals. And there's a whole section called She Who, which is all poems, this is a book of tiny little poems like to fit in your pocket. The Poetry Witch Little Book of Spells, so it has like little poems and spells to cast a circle, to mark the wheel of the year, and also to honor different goddesses. And then it's gotten more and more like that. And then my brand new book that I'm just finishing, Amulets for Brave Women, it's shamelessly goddess. It's like
Mm.
full of goddess stuff. So now I don't even, when I left the university, I got a lot more free to write about what I want to. And so now I just embrace it.
Mm.
So it's become one. Like there's no separation anymore between poetry and the goddess for me. It's the same thing. And I think
Mm.
that's an original going back to the origins of poetry, maybe. I think poetry was probably originally the language of the goddess. And that's how I see it.
That makes so much sense to me because just in my own journey, I I wrote poetry when I was younger and then I put it aside because I'm like, well, I'm not trained in this. This is just sort of like moving through me. So therefore it must not be good. These are the things we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would I, or I can't make money on it. So why would I waste my time on this? But one of the things that sort of came online for me around the time that the divine feminine showed up is this just burning need to write poetry again. And yeah, and I've mostly just done it for myself. But so when you talk about the muse like that, being the goddess, that really, really resonates with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and so I mean, since we have you here, I would really love it if you would be willing to share some of your poetry for listeners. It feels like a just a beautiful way to round out what we've talked about today.
Oh, that would be absolutely wonderful because I it's wonderful to find an audience that already understands the goddess, because so often when I share my poetry, I feel like I have to also initiate people or educate them into it, into what it's actually about. But hello, all of you wonderful goddess aware people. Here are some of my offerings. So these are some tiny little poems from the Poetry Witch Little Book of Spells. And actually, this what I did with this book was I took my big book Spells, which is like my selected poems that came out about 10 years ago, and I went through there and I just picked out the most powerful little moments from a whole bunch of different poems to create this tiny little pocket book that will just give you like the essence. So these are excerpts from bigger poems about the goddess. Okay, so I'm going to read these five little segments. They're each only about 3 lines long, and they're to different goddesses. And this one is for, I'll tell you who the goddesses are ahead of time, so I don't have to interrupt. Nut is the Egyptian goddess who arched over the whole sky. And you might have seen pictures like she's got her feet on one part of the earth and her hands are on the other, and her breasts are sort of hanging down over the earth. It's so beautiful. And then Brigid, the goddess of fire and poetry and healing from the Celtic world. And then Yamaya, the goddess of the ocean, who's in so many countries, loved all around Africa, the Caribbean. And Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who went down to the underworld. And then finally, Changing Woman, the Navajo goddess who never got old, because when she started to get old, she would meet her younger self coming towards her. So these are the five of, there's actually 9 altogether, but here's 5 of them. Newt. In the daylight, my hands reach out for home. In the night, the stars connect the stones and find their way. I'm going to do the whole one of Bridget. It's short. She's the goddess of poetry, so it seems appropriate. For Bridget. Ring, 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 hammers fall. The gold will all be beaten over sudden flaming fire moving from you, the pyre. Sweeten your cauldron until the sun runs with one flame through the day, and the healing water will sing, linger on tongues, burn away. Yamaya. Star of the ocean flow wide in us. Blessings grow round and abide in us. Anna. A goddess goes down and I can see her. She needs to go, decides to go. A goddess goes down and I can hear her. Changing woman. Who is changing as I bend down to what the sky has sent us? Is she changing or the same?
So beautiful.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I thought I would read a couple more that are full poems. I had thought about reading a poem about Eve. It's a sonnet about Eve, and that seemed appropriate. It's from a sequence where I chose the forms and the meters that would have been used for the goddess in that original culture. And the other one is kind of a poem about the goddess as sexual, sacred sexuality.
Yes, yes to both. Let's do it. I want to hear them.
Okay, I'll just do it both. So this one is in my book, Spells, Eve. And the one I will close with is in my brand new book, Amulets for Brave Women, which isn't published yet. So that will be the one that's just shamelessly sexual and goddessy, and where I just don't even care anymore if I look like a mainstream poet. I'm just going for it. Okay, this is Eve. When Mother Eve took the first apple down from the tree that grew where nature's heart had been, and came tumbling, circling rosy into sin, which goddesses were lost and which were found, what spirals moved in pity and unwound across our mother's body with a spin of planets lost for us and all our kin. What serpents curved their mouths into a frown, but left their bodies twined in us, like threads that lead us home to her? Presence warms, and if I follow closely through the maze, it is to where her remembered reaching spreads its branching gifts. It is to her reaching arms that I reach, as if for somewhere near to praise.
Beautiful.
And this one is called Come. Will you come till the truth of her joy strikes the night? Will you come till she feels you in dark and in light? Will you come till you feel her without and within, from end to beginning? Then follow her spin to unfurl a new body with each sacred buzz, till you come to believe her in all that she does. Will you come as she calls you till there's no way to stop? Will you come till you tremble wide open and rock? Will you come till she feels you in dark and in light? Will you come till the truth of her joy strikes your night?
So good and sensual and delightful. Wow. Mm.
Thank you. That was really fun to read aloud. I think it's finally finished. And if you look at it on the page, I'll put it up on the YouTube. Um, it starts out with like small capital H's for her, but small Y's for you. But
Hmm.
in the last stanza, it's a capital Y for you. So it's like you become a goddess yourself.
Yes, as you come. It's pretty great.
As you are.
Come as you are. Oh, I love it so much. Wow. Annie, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What a blessing to know you and to have an opportunity to be in conversation with you and to bring this conversation to listeners. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, Liz. It was a delight. I'm so happy to talk with you. What a treat it's been. And to connect with all of your amazing listeners. What an honor. What a joy. Thank you.
Yes. And tell us, yes,
Yeah.
Goddess bless. And tell if, and I'll be sure to put this in the show notes, but if people would like to learn more about you and your writings and all the amazing things you're doing, where should they look?
Yeah. Well, I've got anniefinch.com as my website. And I do have some places where I teach meter writing to women, poetry and meter. And I'm also starting this, as I mentioned before, it's not just that I'm teaching writing anymore. It's like this whole life of living in these five directions. So I'm calling it Goddess Languages, five goddess languages. And I'm arranging a retreat in India in the fall of 2025, I think it'll be. So you can sign up for that on my website and for my spells letter to stay in the loop. And I'm also on YouTube and other places. So yeah, I would love to, be connected with anyone who cares about poetry and witchery and the goddess.
Amazing. Yes. And I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. And yes, thank you again. And thanks to all of you, as always, for listening. If you like the show, you can leave it a favorable review. You can subscribe to it. You can tell your friends about it. You can do all those things if you so desire. And until next time, I don't know, I want to say something kind of edgy, like come as you are and take really good care of yourselves. And I'll be with you again very soon.